Hi everyone, I'm Auro Ogorian with ACap Advisors and Accountants, and welcome to another edition of the ACap Recap, where we go behind the blog and talk about some of the most important issues for our clients and our listeners. Today, we're going to have a subject matter expert come on and talk to us about college counseling. But before we begin, remember to subscribe, like, and share our channel. And if there's a topic that you want us to talk about, please remember to include it in the comments section or send us an email, and we'll make sure to include it in a future episode. Now, today we have the pleasure of having Evelyn Jerome-Alexander with Magellan College Counseling. And Evelyn comes to us with 25 years of experience in helping high school students get into the college of their choice or the college that's the most appropriate for them. Evelyn has a ton of experience helping with not only college admissions, but extracurricular activities or things that students can do to help them become a better candidate for a college that's the right fit for them. In addition, Evelyn's firm also helps with financing of college. So where to find the best scholarships or how to get needs-based financial aid. So without further ado, let's please welcome Evelyn Jerome-Alexander for our subject matter expert. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'd like to welcome Evelyn Jerome-Alexander to our ACap Recap. I think on everybody's mind is college financing and how to get into college. So Evelyn, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I think what you're going to talk about is enormously helpful for many of our clients and people who are listening. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Ara, for having me.
Yeah, so before we begin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little background, what your firm does, and then we can kind of jump into the details of how we can get our kids into college.
Yep. Well, I'm based in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, went 3,000 miles away to college, did not do a complete college search as I have my clients do. I actually did exactly what I tell them not to do, which is, take a look at rankings and, see which is the best. And that's basically the opposite of what I tell my students to do. So the funny part is if I had to do my college search all over again, I would probably not go where I ended up going.
Okay, where'd you end up going, and then kind of why didn't you do that same process? Was it just you didn't know, or?
Yeah, I mean, there was no guidance way back years ago. Smart San Fernando Valley kid with, decent test scores, aimed really high, shot for some Ivy type schools. I ended up going to Johns Hopkins, which is a fabulous school. And as it turned out, it was a really good fit for me. So I'm lucky. But so many students today, sort of the way I always describe it is I call it the college search and application process. It's really two phases of a process. And most people skip the college search part and they just throw names onto a list and they start applying. Just because you've heard of it doesn't mean it's a good fit for you. Doesn't mean it's highly ranked, doesn't mean it's good for you. So that's the question people ask me all the time, is such and such a good school? I've never heard of University of Puget Sound. Is it a good school? The question is it a good school for you? And that's the research part that people really have to get into. And that's what we help our clients do.
Yeah, I think that's so important because it is really important to make sure that the child matches the school, because Absolutely. If the person is thrives in a small school environment and you put them in like a UCLA or someplace where it's like thousands and thousands of students, they're not going to do well. So, and the University of Puget Sound is a phenomenal school. I actually know several people that have gone there. It's a nice small school.
It is. And actually, to your point, both of my parents went to UCLA, and I didn't know that much about myself. I knew that if I went to UCLA, I would drown. It was just too big for me. So I guess I did, a teeny tiny part, and I did only apply to small-ish schools. So that's part of the search. But, it's really hard. We're talking about 16, 17-year-olds, and we're talking about asking them to make decisions about, how they learn successfully and where they will turn into the human being that they are, meant to be in the world. That's really hard when you're 16 or 17 years old. And so many times the parents kind of want to jump in and do it for them. And so that's kind of the other thing that we do is kind of keep everybody apart and give a little bit of ownership to the student. The ownership part that we don't give away, that we really do have the parents be in the driver's seat, really is the money part. Because I'm sure everyone's heard, the price of college has skyrocketed. People kind of look at the numbers and they're like, how is this possible? What my parents paid for 4 years at Hopkins is now what 1 year at Hopkins costs today. It's kind of out of control. And so the question that I'm assuming most of your clients have is, do I really have to pay that? Like, can my child get a good college education for less than $80,000 a year? And the answer is yes.
Okay. Well, the topic of why college education is rising so much is, I think, a separate conversation.
Totally.
Today, let's talk about how to get into it, how to get a child into college, and also how to finance it. So maybe we can start off with the first part of it. What should kids be doing, or should they be doing anything from like 9th grade to like 12th grade? Like, are there certain things like they should have done on 9th grade and 10th grade, 12th grade? If my question hopefully makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and sometimes I talk to parents starting in the spring of 8th grade when they're choosing their 9th grade classes. So the best advice, and I always tell people, no one pays us for any advice for 9th grade. There's literally nothing that will come out of my mouth that you should pay me for, because the advice is really simple. Take hard classes and get good grades.
Okay.
Take hard classes and get good grades. Do that in 9th grade. And in 9th grade, dip your toe into 1 or 2 clubs at school, or 1 or 2 activities outside of school that you just to explore, right? I'm not asking you to make a 4-year commitment. I'm really just asking you to look around. If there's volunteer work that you can do in your community, do it. Let's see if we're interested in that. If there's a club at school or a sport or a band or something that you just want to explore, do that. That's 9th grade. 10th grade, we ramp it up a little bit. P.S. still take hard classes, get good grades. That's always the advice. But by 10th grade, we should be kind of thinking more about what activities am I doing that I really could dedicate the next 3 years to, right? Because when I apply to college in the fall of 12th grade, I'm going to tell them everything I did from 9th grade on. And colleges really are looking for depth of involvement. So if there's something that you can say you've done for 3 years or 4 years, that looks really good. Colleges are looking to see, who will you be on their campus? How will you contribute to their campus? And the way that they judge that, the way that they assess that, is to look at what you've done in high school.
As far as the depth of involvement, do they want to see, like, for example, you join the ski club, or let's say the animal club,
Pick something.
And you join as a participant, then you maybe take on a leadership position, then maybe take on a bigger leadership position. So depth of involvement, in my understanding, is not only just a length of time, but also how you've kind of progressed within that organization, right?
Absolutely. And don't get caught up on titles. So you don't have to be the co-founder. You don't have to be the president. You can just manage like the bake sale that raised the money for, whatever the annual event was. So you're absolutely right. It's a progressive increase in leadership, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to run for something. Especially think about, what if you have a kid who's an introvert who like really, really doesn't want to take on an active, stand up in front of the crowd responsibility. It can be any kind of responsibility.
So that's a really good point. I mean, because there are a lot of children that are not very sociable, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But how do they make themselves that? How do they take on leadership roles or things that they could help them with their application, make their application stronger?
Yeah. And I'm thinking of kids I've worked with who are introverts. I mean, maybe it's tutoring, maybe it's something that's a little less, public and, requires a little less extroversion. Introverts can absolutely still take on leadership roles. It could be babysitting. It could be, there's all sorts of activities, again, in school or out of school. It could be doing something with your church or your synagogue. I actually have a student this year who is a really serious introvert, can't stand talking to more than one person at a time. And she volunteers at her temple, and she keeps all the little kids, occupied while the parents are in services, right? So again, and she's done that progressively every single year. So the colleges will see that it's something that she's really dedicated time to.
Okay. By the way, I'm looking down because I'm taking notes as things come up. I'm trying to
Sure.
think of questions to ask you.
Sure.
So let's talk a little bit about the testing, because I know there's the SAT, there's a PSAT. When should students be taking the PSAT and also the SAT? And then are there, I keep hearing like there's schools that are maybe coming up with alternatives to the SAT. Is that correct? Or
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is where we're going to put a date stamp on this video, because what I say this year, no, I'm really not kidding. I mean, the world has truly turned upside down with COVID. So think of it this way. The high school class of 2020 were at the end of their senior year of high school when the COVID shutdown hit. So they had already applied to college and things were sort of normal-ish for them.
Right.
The class of 21 entered, let's see, they were at the end of their junior year. They were in the spring of their junior year. And suddenly, if you can't take the SAT the spring of your junior year, which is kind of when everyone tells you is the right time, put an asterisk on that because I don't always agree with that. But if you hadn't taken the SAT or ACT before spring of your junior year and you were class of 2021, you literally could have not had the opportunity to take the SAT or ACT before you applied to college that fall. That would have been fall of 2020, right? We're talking class of 2021. This is a year ago. So if you didn't have the opportunity to take the SAT, colleges realized in the spring and summer of 2020 that this was happening, that like usually 1.5 million students take both the SAT and either the SAT or the ACT. It's usually 1.5 million take each. And the numbers a year ago were like a third of that because sites were shutting down. People couldn't take the SAT. And we're still now in the fall of 2021 at a point where current seniors who were sophomores when the shutdown started could also have not, I mean, I have seniors right now who've literally only taken the SAT one time, and it's because it's been offered in their school because so many SAT and ACT administrations have been canceled. So a year ago, every college in the country said, you know what, we're not going to require a test this year. That made lots of other crazy things happen that I won't start right now. But what it also did, because on top of COVID, remember, we also had some civil rights and social justice awareness happening a year ago. And what that did was it elevated the argument that had been bubbling under the surface in the college admission community that there are inherent biases and unfairnesses in testing. And so the colleges used COVID as the opportunity to say, we're not going to require a test. But many of them are not just doing that for that one year. They're saying, you know, we're going to do like a 2 or 3 year pilot program, and we're going to let people apply without submitting a test score. So now we're literally having to look college by college, right? So for example, every public university in Florida and Georgia are requiring test scores this year, fall of 21, for the class of 22. And we are expecting to see other colleges, they're test optional this year for the class of 22, but we're expecting for future years, we're expecting them to bring back testing requirements. But there will be many, many colleges that never ever bring back testing requirements. So literally the landscape has changed in the last 18 months in a crazy and unalterable way.
Wow, that's incredible. What about California? What's the UC system and the Cal State system?
So the UC system was part of the revolution. And keep in mind that the UC system, so just the UC system, not even the Cal States, the University of California system is 9 undergraduate universities. It is the largest, student-wise, the largest public university system in the country. And the whole country looks to the UCs, right? So 2-3 years ago, when the UCs stopped requiring, or no, the UCs continued to require the essay section of the SAT. No one else cared about the essay, but the UCs cared about the essay. And that's the only reason they continue to administer it. So last year, it was May of 20, the UC Board of Regents said, just for the class of 21, we're not going to require testing. So 21 was a test optional year. And then later that summer, they announced we're going to keep the same policy for the class of 22. And then they announced later that year that for the class of 23 and 24, at least they're thinking ahead and announcing ahead. For the class of 23 and 24, so right now their current 10th and 11th graders, the University of California system will be test blind. So there's a difference. There's test optional, which means you can send us your test score if you want, and we'll take a look at it. That's one piece of information we'll consider. Test blind means we literally won't look at it.
Wow.
Won't even consider it. So the Cal State system, test blind. The UC system right now, test blind. And they said at the time, we're going to consider creating our own entrance exam. And they were right. And they were thinking of basing it on the California Better Balance. There's some sort of high school exam that students take. And just a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week ago, they announced that they would not have an entrance exam period. So basically the University of California system, from what I can tell from this point forward, is test blind, won't consider test scores, period.
Wow, that's so we don't even know what's going to happen with freshmen all the way till maybe
so frustrating. It's so frustrating for them. Like, how do you know what to do if nobody's telling you what the rules are?
Okay, so let's put the testing aside. Let's look at some of the other. Obviously, academics are very important. You want to take rigorous classes, get good grades, extracurricular activities. What are some other things that students can be doing or thinking about to help them with their admissions process or make them a better candidate overall? Like, what do you think of like maybe the Boys or Girl Scouts or things like that? What are maybe some other things people are doing?
Yeah, I mean, people ask me all the time if one extracurricular activity is better than, is 4 years of student government better than 4 years of a sport? The colleges are very agnostic between activities. Like really, whatever you do you, and you do it really deep. But the unfortunate answer to your question is that I'm going to take a step back and answer it outside the question.
Okay. I thought you were going to say it depends.
Well, I didn't tell you this, but I have a little sign on my desk that says the answer to every question you could ever ask me is it depends. Yeah. And it depends on where you're trying to get in. It depends on a million things. But the answer to the question is, so if the question is, how do I make myself the best possible candidate for college admission? You know what you do? You take hard classes, you get good grades, you take as much of the rigor, the honors and AP classes or IB classes, take as much of the rigor that your high school offers as possible. And if you go beyond, I have some parents say to me like, well, she finished math because she got to AP Calc BC and that's what her school offers. There's no finished math. There's a community college down the street, right? Yeah, take linear algebra there. But the bad news is, and the testing situation has exacerbated this problem. The bad news is it's a numbers problem. There are more graduating high school seniors in California than spaces in both the UC and the Cal State system. There's 500,000 graduating high school seniors in California. And are you ready? Are you sitting down? There's 200,000 spots in the freshman class for all 9 UC campuses and all 23 Cal State campuses combined.
So 200,000 combined for UCs and Cal States and
That's
500,000?
it.
Wow.
That's it. So what's the answer to the problem? All of the 500,000 graduating seniors don't go to college, right? Right. Probably half of them do. So there's kind of enough room for most of the kids who want to go to college. Now we just have to sort out who goes where. But that's part of the problem, right? Because some kids apply to Berkeley and UCLA and they're not interested in Merced and they're not interested in Riverside and they won't apply to Santa Cruz. And some kids will apply to Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, which is more competitive than, I had a kid are you ready? I had a kid get into Stanford and waitlisted at Cal Poly 1 year.
Wow. Interesting.
Waitlisted.
I think there's also a lot of people that have perfect scores and don't get into Stanford because you never know what they're looking for, right?
Of course. That's right. Oh, Stanford rejects 70% of the kids with perfect scores. 70%. Wow. With perfect scores. So this is the problem. Kids get in their head like, I really want Cal Poly or I really, really want San Diego State. Do you think nobody else thought of that? Those are the 2 most applied to Cal States in the system, but they don't want Cal State Bakersfield. They don't want to go up to Humboldt. They don't want to go to San Marcos. They want San Diego. So it's kind of a distribution problem, right? And so to me, the solution, so some people say, if I don't get Cal Poly, if I don't get UC Irvine, I'll just go to Santa Monica College and I'll transfer. That's fine. You can do that. My solution is, my job is to make sure that every student who works with me has options, right? So community college is always an option. It's not a bad option. I'm not here to tell you it's a bad option. Frankly, it's a really good financial option. I will tell you, and this comes from a place of privilege, and you have to understand that people who are watching us probably share that. if you want your child to have a 4-year college experience, if you want them to go to football games, if they want to have a roommate, if they want to have that experience, if you are willing to pay for college as an experience in your child's life, you have to recognize that if they start at a community college, you are forever giving up that experience. It's something you don't get back when you transfer in as a junior. You never get that back. And I recognize that this is privilege. But my message is specifically for California folks, and I work with people all over the country, as I know you do too. But specifically for California folks, we have an impaction problem. That's what it's called. It has a name. We have an impaction problem in California with the UCs and the Cal States. And my solution to it is there are 2,200 other colleges in the United States. And some of them give California residents a tuition discount, right? So some of them know that they're competing with the UCs and Cal States. They know what the prices for in-state tuition are. And they give a discount that brings down, maybe not exactly to the penny, right? You may pay a little bit more to go to Oregon State or Washington State than you would to go to UC Irvine. But you know what? I can almost promise you're going to graduate in 4 years. And that's a little bit of a hidden cost with the UCs and Cal States, is they are so impacted that you might not graduate in 4 years. You might have to bump over to the ninth semester, or however many quarters there are. It might cost you more than you think it's going to cost. So, in addition to getting that 4-year college experience, and I tell this to people all the time, you should look at 4-year graduation rates, right? You don't want your kid to go somewhere where the 4-year graduation rate is 23%. By the way, what do you think the 4-year graduation rate at the Cal State system is?
I have no idea. I mean, when you said 23%, I'm assuming it's probably lower than that?
It's lower than 23%. It's lower than 20%.
So that means less than 20% or less than 25% of people who matriculate at Cal States graduate?
In 4 years.
In 4 years, wow. That's incredible.
And it's an impaction problem, because here's the thing. If you're a psychology major and you go to register your first semester and Psychology 101 is full, and you can't get that class, and you can't take it till spring, or worse, they only offer it in fall, you're already a semester or a year behind for the classes that you have to take down the road that require Psych 101 as a prerequisite.
So I don't know how much of this has an impact, but I remember several years ago, I used to sit on career panels. And so I'd sit on career panels at Cal State schools, and also at UC schools, and some private schools as well. And what I noticed is almost 99% of the time, almost 99.9% of the time, the people at the Cal State schools were working during the day and going at night, or working, at nighttime and going to school during the day, because they came from working class families and they were, working. So as a result, they ended up having to prolong their college experience. Whereas the people from the UCs or the private schools, they didn't really have to worry about working. They were just going to school, and as a result, they were able to take as many classes as they could. So I wonder how much of that has to do with this 23% graduating, in a 4-year time period.
It's totally related and connected to that. If you look at the California community college system, we have a very extensive, like over 200 community colleges in the state, right? And the job of the community college system is to get people transferred into 4-year universities. However, this is actually the 23%. Only 23% of California community college students ever transfer to a 4-year. And think about why. You're 19 years old. You decide to start a community college because you didn't get into whatever you wanted to get into. And think about it this way. If you had a 4.0, if you had really good grades, and you went to community college and you're taking, I kind of call it 13th grade. You're taking the same math and the same English and the same science that you were taking a year ago. And you were killing it here. And now you're like, why am I doing this again? And your parents say, you're 19. It's time for you to pay us a little bit of rent, right? It's time for you to pay your way. Right. So you're like, okay, I'll go get a job. And so instead of taking 5 classes, you're going to take 4. And you're going to go get a job. And then next semester, they give you a raise and a promotion. And now you only take 3 classes. So what should take you, this is why the transfer rate looks like it looks. What should take you 2 years to get your 60 credits to transfer could take 3 or 4 or never.
Wow, it's incredible. If we can pivot a little bit, I want to talk about something else that I think it's on some parents' minds, especially parents who have kids in middle school. They're trying to weigh the pros and cons of sending their kids to a private school or a public school.
Right.
What is your opinion on, private school versus public school? Does one or the other improve your chances of getting into? I know you're going to pull up the it depends. I know. But do you have any thoughts on that, or should we just kind of move on and talk about a different subject?
No, I mean, it's a very personal decision. And I talk to 7th and 8th grade parents about this all the time. There are things you get, bottom line is you get more attention at private high schools. Your child will probably have better, stronger letters of recommendation from their teachers. They will have more time with their college counselor. Do they get better results? Honestly, like if you look at who gets into UC Berkeley from, pick a private school in LA versus pick a public school in LA, the numbers are not that different, is the truth.
Oh, interesting.
They're not that different. So I basically would say to each family, look at it as what's the right environment for my child. If a private school is the right environment, then it's worth spending the money. If it doesn't matter, I don't know, to be honest with you, if it were my 35, 40 grand a year, I don't know that I would spend it that way.
Okay, enough said. Let's move on to a different topic, which is the financing of the school. So obviously, I think that is equally as important as getting your child into college. I don't even know where to start. Where do parents start as far as getting financing? Obviously, there's a FAFSA you got to fill out, and most parents probably don't qualify for those types of needs-based grants. But what are some other sources that parents or kids can go to and find some other financing sources?
Yeah, I wish I had my picture that I have a graphic that I'll send you. So people think they're not going to qualify for need-based aid, but that's not always true. So need is different based on the cost of the college. So I'll try to simplify it. The FAFSA, free application for federal student aid, is sort of the gateway for this, right? And you fill out the FAFSA and it gives you a number. It decides for you what you can afford for college. So the bad news is no one is ever going to call you up and say, how much do you think you can afford for your child's college? They don't ask, they tell you. You put in your numbers, they spit out a number. You put in your data, it spits out a number at you, right? So perfect example. I met with a client last night and they showed me it's called expected family contribution, EFC. They showed me their EFC. They had done the FAFSA and their EFC came back at $45,000. So, they told it their numbers and the government said, great, you can afford 45 grand per year for college. P.S. They have twins, which means 90. That's a different story.
Wow.
So let's just say your number comes back $45,000. If your child gets into a UC or a Cal State, that $45,000 is more than the cost, right? Because a UC is about $37,000 all in, room, board, tuition, everything. So their number is greater than what a UC would cost. So what the UCs are going to say is, yay, you can afford us, bye. And that's the end of the conversation. However, if the child, we talked about University of Puget Sound, I don't know their price off the top of my head, but honestly, most private schools, especially on the coast, the funny thing is if we talk about the middle of the country, the numbers are a little bit different. And that's a little bit of a savings tip, by the way. But if we're talking about the coasts, most of the private universities are, everybody sit down, anywhere between $70,000 and $80,000. That's tuition, room, board, books, health expenses, transportation, all combined into one number. So let's just say, I actually think we looked it up yesterday. I think Puget Sound is about 77. So if their number comes in at 45,000 and the price is 77,000, there's a gap there. So they have need. That is called demonstrated need, right? So need is the cost of the college minus your expected family contribution. If there's a gap there, now we have to think about how does the college fill that gap? The first chunk of money that most colleges will offer are student loans. We used to call them Stafford loans. We just call them student loans now. There's two kinds of student loans. There's subsidized and unsubsidized. One accrues interest. The unsubsidized is the one that accrues interest from the moment that the money is dispersed. The subsidized is the one where you don't pay interest until 6 months after you get your degree. So that's the first. You're allowed to borrow. Students are allowed to borrow $5,500 per year. But that gap, remember, that gap was $32,000.
Right.
Okay, so the first $5,500 would be student loans. The next $2,500 would probably be work study, right? So that student would qualify to work at the admission office or the alumni office on campus. It's usually about $2,500 per year. So that's the first $8,000. of the gap.
Well,
And now,
still a big gap.
There's still a big gap. And so now the question we have to ask is, does the college have a record of filling the rest of the gap? And the source that I use for this information is collegedata.com. If you go on collegedata.com, you can check and see what percent of need each college fills. And I would say that you should always look at the college's track record of filling need. If they have a track record of filling 100% of need, you can be pretty much assured that they're going to fill that gap. Many colleges that do fill need, they just give it as a grant. They will call it, the Puget Sound grant, and that will just fill up the rest of the gap. But there are some colleges that only fill 60% of need or 70% of need. If they only fill 50, 60% of it, the rest of it is up to you. So not only are you going to pay your EFC, but you might have to pay some of that gap too.
Hopefully this is where they're using those huge endowments for.
Well, the wealthy colleges, they are, but when you look at I'm thinking of University of Wisconsin, they don't fill 100% of need. They fill like 50, 60% of need. So what you would pay, and so this is the thing, people think public universities are less expensive, but they're not always, because they're not always willing to fill that gap as much as the private universities are. And this is where there's two kinds of money, right? There's need-based aid and there's merit-based aid. So even if they don't fill 100% of need, you should be looking for schools that also give merit aid. That's, money that's based on, it used to be grades and test scores, now it's just grades. The bad news here, I'm just full of bad news. The bad news here is the names, right? The highly ranked schools, they don't give merit money. Who would Stanford give merit money to, right? Getting in is your merit. So this is where, honestly, I use college data a lot for this information, because it tells you what percent of need the colleges fill, but also if they give merit-based money.
Okay. If there's anything else to talk about related to the financing part, let's kind of pivot over to how you work with parents and how you work with students. Yep. And, when you get involved and, what your level of involvement is. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, the earliest, I told you, the 9th grade advice is free. The earliest people, sign on with us is 10th grade, beginning of 10th grade. And we'll start helping them plan, curriculum for the next couple of years, summer activities, extracurricular activities, a testing timeline. Just because colleges aren't requiring testing doesn't mean we shouldn't take it. If you happen to have a good tester, you should absolutely, have a timeline for that. We'll help them, consider which teachers to ask for letters of recommendation. So we really, it's a hand-holding service. We really hold their hand all the way through, the spring of their senior year. The applications go in the fall of student senior year. So that's like the really busy time, but we're also trying to pull the work earlier, right? So if we can do some of the essay writing over the summer before senior year, so they're not slammed up against deadlines, we're trying to do that. It all depends on, when people call us. We have people call us late in the cycle. We jump right in and help them write essays and, get over the finish line. But the truth is I've thought about this lately because it's October and I have new seniors that I've started with literally in the last couple days. But the people who start late usually have a more unrealistic college list. It's a little reachier, if you will. And the clients that I've been working with for a long time, their list is balanced. They're happy with all the schools on their list. Many of them have submitted applications. I submitted 4 with a student yesterday. It's mid-October. Wow. So, the earlier you start, the less stressed we're all going to be. And
hopefully you're not taking pictures of these kids next to rowing machines, right? And submitting them.
Next to what?
Rowing machines. Do you only work with students or parents for undergraduates, or do you have any people that you work with that are trying to get into graduate school?
It's funny. Clients always come back to us and ask for help with their graduate applications. It's so awesome. Like, oh my God, she's going to law school already. So we don't do any graduate school. I do have a couple people that I refer out to. We do what we're really good at, which is undergraduate admission. We do transfer from community college to 4-year, but we don't do graduate. We don't do international. There's a couple things that we just don't do because we're not an expert at it.
You have to have a niche, right? How about 8th graders trying to get into a private school? Do you help with that at all?
Yeah, we don't do that either. There's people all over the place who specialize just in that.
Okay.
That's the whole thing.
I completely understand. Yeah. So it's great to really specialize just in the undergraduate realm, because that is I think that's probably where the greatest need is. A lot of parents are trying to figure out how to get their kids into a good college and get them the education that they need. I was going to ask you, oh, you mentioned a handout earlier. In the video, where we're going to put in the notes section, we'll put in obviously your contact information, any handouts or anything like that. We'll have links to them. So anything else as far as like closing thoughts you might have for students or parents?
Well, one of the things we didn't really talk about, and I'll send you some information on this, is college tours. And I would just say I highly recommend, ninth grade is a little bit early, but I definitely recommend starting in 10th grade. Just visit a couple colleges in your local area, right? No matter where you live, there's probably a large university and a small university near you, close enough to, take an afternoon. It really helps. We're asking students to make these decisions kind of in a vacuum. They don't know what a big college or a small college looks like. So help them understand what that feel is like, and just go take a day trip and, spend an hour or two on a campus near you. They'll get the feel. They'll start to feel it.
At what point should they have like a formalized college tour? I mean, I'm assuming these colleges do that as well. Is it later on, or can they do that also?
They can do that. I mean, they can really do that anytime, but I would say late 10th grade or early 11th grade is a really good time to start that. Do
colleges have that year round, or is it only certain times of the year?
No, year round, absolutely.
Okay, so you just call the college and say, I want to do like a tour, and it's
all online now.
That's what I figured. Yeah.
And the one tip I would give, because I'm assuming it's parents watching this, have your student sign up in their name. Don't do it in your name. Colleges don't want to talk to parents. They really, really want to connect with students. So again, this is kind of that ownership thing. Let your child take ownership. Yes, you can do the work for them, but have them be the one doing the signing up.
Right, because once they get into college, they're going to be the ones that's going to be responsible for doing the work. You don't want this helicopter parenting, Yep. Although I do know some college professors who always talk about how parents contact them about their kids' grades, and they're just, it's mind-boggling.
Not in a good way. They're not talking about it in a good way.
Oh, no, of course not. No.
Yeah. No, admission offices, we spend a lot of time talking, visiting colleges and talking to colleges, and they tell us these horror stories of, moms that call up and disguise their voice and, pretend that they're their son. Not kidding. Yeah. And guess what? Note in the file, Mrs. Johnson called up and pretended to be Johnny. Not kidding.
Wow. That is really over the top. So listeners out there, do not do that.
Pro tip.
Pro tip. Have your child be the one that's actually contacting the school and setting up these tours. So Evelyn, thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic. I think this is a lot of really good information for many of our listeners and our clients. So thank you again for being part of this, and really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.